Hello, world. Hello, world. Hello, hello. Um, I think everything is working. Welcome to this evening's readings. I apologize again for all of the technical kerfuffle. Isn't learning great? I think I'll get it under control by the time this event finishes. So, yes, again, sorry about that. Moving on. It's been a delightful day for Hanoi. We had multiple sun showers, um, which really is just a wondrous thing. I am sitting down, which is new. Let's see how that works out for the reading. You can tell me if it sounds awful. You can tell me if you don't really care. Tonight's reading I would like to dedicate to tonight's reading I would like to dedicate to a lady called Debbie Maziris, who was a drama teacher in my high school and who encouraged me to join her circus, which was great fun. Moving on, let's begin. The first tale of this evening is called The Three Children of Fortune. Once upon a time, a father sent for his three sons, and gave to the eldest a cock, to the second a scythe, and to the third a cat. I am old now, said he. My end is approaching, and I would fain provide for you before I die. Money I have none, and what I now give you seems to be of little worth, yet it rests with yourselves alone to return my gifts to good account. Only seek out for a land where you have is as yet unknown, and your fortune is made. After the death of the father, the eldest son set out with his cock. But wherever he went, in every town, he saw from afar off a cock sitting upon the church steeple and turning around in the wind. In the villages, he always heard plenty of them crowing, and his bird was therefore nothing new. So there did not seem much chance of his making fortune. At length it happened that he came to an island where the people who lived there had never heard of a cock, and knew not even how to reckon the time. They knew, indeed, if it were morning or evening, but at night, if they lay awake, they had no means of knowing how time went. Behold, said he to them, what a noble animal this is! How like a knight he is! He carries a bright red crest upon his head and spurs upon his heels. He crows 3 times every night at stated hours, and at the third time the sun is about to rise. But this is not all. Sometimes he screams in broad daylight, and then you must take warning, for the weather is surely about to change. This pleased the natives mightily. They kept awake one whole night and heard, to their great joy, how gloriously the cock called the hour at 2, 4, and 6 o'clock. Then they asked him whether the bird was to be sold, and how much he would sell it for. About as much gold as an ass can carry, said he. A very fair price for such an animal, cried they with one voice, and agreed to give him what he asked. When he returned home with his wealth, his brothers wondered greatly, and the second said, I will now set forth likewise, and see if I can turn my scythe to as good an account. There did not seem, however, much likelihood of this, for go where he would, he was met by peasants who had as good a scythe on their shoulders as he had. But at last, as good luck would have it, he came to an island where the people had never heard of a scythe. There, as soon as the corn was ripe, they went into the fields and pulled it up, but this was very hard work, and a great deal of it was lost. The man then set to work with his scythe and mowed down, and mowed down. Oh my goodness, I got distracted. And mowed down the whole crop so quickly that the people stood staring open-mouthed with wonder. They were willing to give him what he asked for such a marvelous thing, but he only took a horse laden with as much gold as it could carry. Now the third brother had a great longing to go and see what he could make of his cat. So he set out. So he set out. So he set out. And at first it happened to him as it had to the others. So long as he kept upon the mainland, he met with no success. There were plenty of cats everywhere, indeed too many, so that the young ones were for the most part, as soon as they came into the world, drowned in the water. At last he passed over an island where, as it chanced, most luckily for him, nobody had ever seen a cat, and they were overrun with mice to such a degree that the little wretch danced upon the tables and chairs, whether the master of the house were at home or not. The people complained loudly of this grievance. The king himself knew not how to rid himself of them in his palace. In every corner mice were squeaking, and they gnawed everything that their teeth could lay hold of. Here was a fine field for puss. She soon began her chase, and had cleared 2 rooms in the twinkling of an eye. When the people besought the king to buy the wonderful animal for the good of the public at any price, the king willingly gave what was asked, a mule laden with gold and jewels. And thus the third brother returned home with a richer prize than either of the others. Meantime, the cat feasted away upon the mice in the royal palace and devoured so many that they were no longer any great in numbers. At length, quite spent and tired with her work, she became extremely thirsty. So she stood still, drew up her head, and cried, Meow, meow. The king gathered together all his subjects when they heard this strange cry, and many ran shrieking with a great fright out of the palace. But the king held a great council below as to what was best to be done, and it was at length fixed to send the herald to the cat, to warn her to leave the castle forthwith, or with that force would be used to remove her. For, said the councillors, we would far more willingly put up with the mice, since we are used to that evil, than get rid of them at risk of our lives. A page accordingly went and asked the cat whether she was willing to quit the castle. But Puss, whose thirst became every moment more and more pressing, answered nothing but meow, meow, which the page interpreted to mean no, no, and therefore carried this answer to the king. Well, said the councillors, then we must try what force will do. So the guns were planted, and the palace was fired upon from all sides. When the fire reached the room where the cat was, she sprang onto the window and ran away. But the besiegers did not see her, and went on firing until the whole palace was burnt to the ground. The end. Oh, a bit hot. This quickly rearrange. The 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 that's better. The second story of this evening, the second tale, sorry, of this evening is called King Grizzlybeard. A great king had a daughter who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty and conceited that none of the princes who came to ask her in marriage were good enough for her, and she only made sport of them. Once upon a time, the king held a great feast and invited all her suitors, and they sat in a row according to their rank, kings and princes and dukes and earls. Then the princess came in and passed by them all, but she had something spiteful to say for every one. The first was too fat. "He's as round as a tub," said she. The next was too tall. "What a maypole," said she. The next was too short. "What a dumpling," said she. The fourth was too pale, and she called him Wall-face. The fifth was too red, so she called him Coxcomb. The sixth was not straight enough, so she said he was like a green stick that had been laid to dry over a baker's oven. And thus she had some joke to crack upon every one. But she laughed more than all at a good king who was there. "Look at him," said she. "His beard is like an old mop. He shall be called Grizzlybeard." So the king got the name Grizzlybeard. But the old king was very angry when he saw how his daughter behaved, and how she ill-treated all his guests. And he vowed that, willing or unwilling, she should marry the first beggar that came to the door. 2 days after, there came by a travelling musician, who began to sing under the window and beg alms. And when the king heard him, he said, "Let him come in." So they brought in a dirty-looking fellow, and when he had sung before the king and the princess, he begged a boon. Then the king said, "You have sung so well that I will give you my daughter for your wife." The princess begged and prayed, but the king says, "I have sworn to give you to the first beggar, and I will keep my word." So words and tears were of no avail. The parson was sent for, and she was married to the musician. When this was over, the king said, "Now get ready to go. You must not stay here. You must travel on with your husband." Then the beggar departed, and took her with him, and they soon came to a great wood. "Pray," said she, "whose is this wood?" "It belongs to the King Grizzlybeard," said he. "Hast thou taken him? All this would have been thine." "Ah, unlucky wretch that I am," said she. "Would that I had married King Grizzlybeard." Next, they came to some fine meadows. "Whose are these beautiful green meadows?" said she. "They belong to Grizzlybeard." "Hast thou taken him? Then they had been thine." "Ah, unlucky wretch that I am," said she. "Would that I had married King Grizzlybeard." Then they came to a great city. "Whose is this noble city?" said she. "It belongs to King Grizzlybeard. Hast thou taken him? It had all been thine." "Ah, miserable wretch that I am," said she. Why did I not marry King Grizzlybeard? That is no business of mine, said the musician. Why should you wish for another husband? Am not I good enough for you? At last they came to a small cottage. What a paltry place, said she. To whom does this little dirty hole belong? The musician answered, This is your and my house where we are to live. Where are your servants? Cried she. What do you want with servants? Said he. You must do yourself whatever is to be done. Now make the fire and put on water and cook my supper, for I am very tired. But the princess knew nothing of making fires and cooking, and the beggar was forced to help her. When they had eaten a very scanty meal, they went to bed. But the musician called her up very early in the morning to clean the house. Thus they lived for 2 days, and when they had eaten up all there was in the cottage, the man said, Wife, we can't go on like this, spending money and earning nothing. You must learn to weave baskets. Then he went out and cut willows and brought them home, and she began to weave. But it made her fingers very sore. I see this work won't do, said he. Try and spin. Perhaps you will do better than that. So she sat down and tried to spin, but the threads cut her tender fingers till the blood ran. See now, you are good for nothing, said the musician. You can do no work. What a bargain I have got. However, I'll try and set up a trade in pots and pans, and you shall stand in the market and sell them. Alas, sighed she, when I stand in the market and one of my father's court pass by and see me there, how they will laugh at me. But the beggar did not care for that, and said she must work if she did not wish to die of hunger. At first the trade went well, for many people seeing such a beautiful woman went to buy her wares, and paid their money without thinking of taking away the goods. They lived on this as long as it lasted, and then her husband bought a fresh pot of ware, and she sat herself down with it in a corner of the market. But a drunken soldier soon came by and rode his horse against her stall and broke all her goods into 1,000 pieces. Then she began to weep and knew not what to do. Ah, what will become of me? Said she. What will my husband say? So she ran home and told him all. Who would have thought you would be so silly, said he, as to put on earthenware stall in the corner of the market where everybody passes? But let us have no more crying. I see you are not fit for this sort of work. So I have been to the king's palace and asked if they did not want a kitchen maid, and they have promised to take you, and there you will have plenty to eat. Thus the princess became a kitchen maid, and helped the cook to do all the dirtiest work. She was allowed after to carry some home the meat that was left, and on this she and her husband lived. She had not been there long before she heard that the king's eldest son was passing by, going to get married, and she went to one of the windows and looked out. Everything was ready, and all the pomp and splendor of the court was there. Then she thought with an aching heart of her own and sad fate, and bitterly grieved for the pride and folly which had brought her so low. The servants gave her some of the rich meats, which she put into a basket to take home. All on a sudden, as she was going out, in came the king's son in golden clothes. And when he saw a beautiful woman at the door, he took her by the hand and said she should be his partner in the dance. But she trembled for fear, for she saw that it was King Grizzlybeard who was making sport of her. However, he kept fast hold and led her in, and the cover of the basket came off, so that the meats in it fell all about. Then everybody laughed and jeered at her, and she was so abashed that she whisked herself 1,000 deep feet in the earth. She sprang to the door to run away, but on the steps King Grizzlybeard overtook and brought her back, and said, "Fear me not. I am the musician who has lived with you in the hut. I brought you there because I loved you. I am also the soldier who overset your stall. I have done all this only to cure you of pride and to punish you for the ill treatment you bestowed on me. Now all is over. You have learnt wisdom, your faults are gone, and it is time to celebrate our marriage feast." Then the chamberlains came and brought her the most beautiful robes, and her father and his whole court were there already and congratulated her on her marriage. Joy was in every face, the feast was grand, and all were merry, and I wish you and I had been part of the party. The end. The next story rearranging myself, sorry. The following tale, I never know how to say this word. Okay. I may not say one very important word correctly for this whole thing. I apologize in advance. The following tale is called The Adventures of Cantelier and Partlet. Chantelier? Cantelier. I'm going to go with Cantelier. Sorry if that's wrong. Number 1. How they went to the mountains to eat nuts. "The nuts are quite ripe now," said Cantelier to his wife Partlet. "Suppose we go together to the mountains and eat as many as we can, before the squirrel takes them all away." "With all my heart," said Partlet. "Let us go and make a holiday of it together." So they went to the mountains, and as it was a lovely day, they stayed there till the evening. Now, whether it was that they had eaten too many nuts that they could not walk, or whether they were lazy and would not, I do not know. However, they took it into their heads that it did not become them to go home on foot. So Cantelier began to build a little carriage of nutshells, and when it was finished, Partlet jumped into it and sat down, and bid Cantelier harness himself to it and draw her home. "That's a good joke," said Cantelier. "No, that will never do. I had rather by half walk home. I'll sit on the box and be the coachman, if you like, but I will not draw." While this was passing, a duck came quacking up and cried, "You thieving vagabonds! What business have you in my grounds? I'll give you well for your insolence." And upon that she fell upon Cantelier most lustily. But Cantelier was no coward, and returned the duck's blows with his sharp spurs so fiercely that she soon began to cry out for mercy, which was only granted upon her condition that she would draw the carriage home for them. This she agreed to, and Cantelier got upon the box and drove, crying, "Now, duck, go on as fast as you can." And away they went at a pretty good pace. After they had travelled along a little way, they met a needle and a pin walking together along the road. And the needle cried out, "Stop, stop!" and said it was so dark that they could hardly find their way, and such dirty walking they could not get on at all. He told them that he and his friend, the pin, had been at a public house a few miles off, and had sat drinking till they had forgotten how late it was. He begged, therefore, that the travellers would be so kind as to give them a lift in their carriage. Cantelier, observing that they were but thin fellows and not likely to take up much room, told them that they might ride, but made them promise not to dirty the wheels of the carriage in getting in, nor to tread on Partlet's toes. Late at night they arrived at an inn, and as it was bad travelling in the dark, and the duck seemed much tired, and waddled about a good deal from one side to the other, they made up their minds to fix their quarters there. But the landlord at first was unwilling, and said his house was full, thinking they might not be very respectable company. However, they spoke civilly to him, and gave him the egg which Partlet had laid by the way, and said they would give him the duck, who was in the habit of laying one every day. So at last he let them come in, and they bespoke a handsome supper, and spent the evening very jollily. Early in the morning, before it was quite light, and when nobody was stirring in the inn, Cantalier awakened his wife, and fetching the egg, they pecked a hole in it and ate it up. They pecked a hole in it and ate it up, and threw the shells into the fireplace. Then they went to the pin and needle, who were fast asleep, and seizing them by their heads, stuck one into the landlord's easy chair and the other into his handkerchief. And having done this, they crept away as softly as possible. However, the duck, who slept in the open air in the yard, heard them coming, and jumping into the brook which ran close by the inn, soon swam out of their reach. An hour or two afterwards, the landlord got up and took his handkerchief to wipe his face, but the pin ran into him and pricked him. And when he walked into the kitchen to light his pipe at the fire, but when he stirred it up, the eggshells flew into his eyes and almost blinded him. "Bless me," said he, "all the world seems to have a design against my head this morning." And so saying, he threw himself sulkily into his easy chair. But oh dear, the needle ran into him, and this time the pain was not in his head. He now flew into a very great passion, and suspecting the company who had come in the night before, he went to look after them. But they were all off, so he swore that he never again would take in such a troop of vagabonds, who ate a great deal, paid no reckoning, and gave him nothing for his trouble but their apish tricks. This is a story in multiple parts, so that's the end of one part. And Cantalier and Partlet, number 2. How Cantalier and Partlet went to visit Mr. Korbes. Another day, Cantalier and Partlet wished to ride out together. So Cantalier built a handsome carriage with 4 red wheels, and harnessed 6 mice to it. And then he and Partlet got into the carriage, and away they drove. Soon after, a cat met them and said, "Where are you going?" And Cantalier replied, "All on our way, a visit to pay to Mr. Korbes the fox today." Then the cat said, "Take me with you." Cantalier said, "With all my heart, get up behind, and be sure you do not fall off. Take care of this handsome coach of mine, nor dirty my pretty red wheels so fine. Now mice be ready, and wheels run steady, for we are going to pay to Mr. Korbes the fox today." Soon after came up a millstone, an egg, a duck, and a pin. Okay, and Cantalier gave them all leave to get into the carriage and go with them. When they arrived at Mr. Korbes's house, he was not at home, so the mice drew the carriage into the coach house. Cantalier and Partlet flew upon a beam. The cat sat down in the fireplace. The duck got into the washing cistern. The pin stuck himself into the bed pillow. the millstone laid himself over the house door, and the egg rolled herself up in the towel. When Mr. Korbes came home, he went to the fireplace to make a fire. But the cat threw all the ashes in his eyes, so he ran into the kitchen to wash himself. But there the duck splashed all the water in his face, and when he tried to wipe himself, the egg broke to pieces in the towel all over his face and eyes. Then he was very angry and went without his supper to bed. But when he laid his head on the pillow, the pin ran into his cheek. At this he became quite furious, and, jumping up, would have ran out of the house, but when he came to the door, the millstone fell down on his head and killed him on the spot. That's the end of that one. The third part of this story is called How Partlet Died and Was Buried, and How Cantilia Died of Grief. Another day, Cantilia and Partlet agreed to go again to the mountains to eat nuts, and it was settled that all the nuts which they found should be shared equally between them. Now Partlet found a very large nut, but she said nothing about it to Cantilia and kept it all to herself. However, it was so big that she could not swallow it, and it stuck in her throat. Then she was in a great fright and cried out to Cantilia, "Pray run as fast as you can and fetch me some water, or I shall be choked." Cantilia ran as fast as he could to the river and said, "River, give me some water, for Partlet lies in the mountains and will be choked by a great nut." The river said, "Run first to the bride and ask her for a silken cord to draw up the water." Cantilia ran to the bride and said, "Bride, you must give me a silken cord, for then the river will give me water, and the water I will carry to Partlet, who lies on the mountain and will be choked by a great nut." But the bride said, "Run first and bring me my garland, for this is hanging on a willow in the garden." Then Cantilia ran to the garden and took the garland from the bough where it hung and brought it to the bride, and then the bride gave him the silken cord, and then he took the silken cord to the river, and the river gave him the water, and then he carried the water to Partlet, but in the meantime she was choked by the great nut, and lay quite dead and never moved any more. Then Cantilia was very sorry and cried bitterly, and all the beasts came and wept with him over poor Partlet. And 6 mice built a little hearse to carry her to her grave, and when it was ready they harnessed themselves before it, and Cantilia drove them. On the way they met the fox. "Where are you going, Cantilia?" said he. "To bury my Partlet," said the other. "May I go with you?" said the fox. "Yes, but you must get up behind, or my horses will not be able to draw you." Then the fox got up behind, and presently the wolf, the bear, the goat, and all the beasts of the wood came and climbed upon the hearse. So on they went till they came to a rapid stream. "How shall we get over?" said Cantilia. Then said a straw, "I will lay myself across, and you shall pass over upon me." But as the mice were going over, the straw slipped away and fell into the water, and the 6 mice all fell in and were drowned. What was to be done? Then a large log of wood came and said, "I am big enough. I will lay myself across the stream, and you shall pass over upon me." So he laid himself down, but they managed so clumsily that the log of wood fell in and was carried away by the stream. Then a stone, who saw what had happened, came up and kindly offered to help poor Cantalier by lying himself across the stream, and this time he got safely to the other side with the hearse and managed to get Partlet out of it. But the fox and the other mourners who were sitting behind were too heavy and fell back into the water and were all carried away by the stream and drowned. Thus Cantalier was left alone with his dead Partlet, and having dug a grave for her, he laid her in it, and made a little hillock over her. Then he sat down by the grave, and wept and mourned, till at last he died too, and so all were dead. The end. That was a good one. And the following story, hmm, it's a tale. I'm not quite sure what the difference is. The following tale is called Snowdrop. Ooh, crazy noises. It was in the middle of winter, when the broad flakes of snow were falling around, that a certain queen sat working at a window, the frame of which was made of fine black ebony. And as she was looking out upon the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon it. Then she gazed thoughtfully upon the red drops which sprinkled the white snow, and said, "Would that my little daughter may be as white as the snow, as red as the blood, and as black as the ebony window frame." And so the little girl grew up. Her skin was as white as snow, her cheeks as rosy as the blood, and her hair as black as ebony, and she was called Snowdrop. But this queen died, and the king soon married another wife, who was very beautiful, but so proud that she could not bear to think that anyone could surpass her. She had a magical looking-glass, to which she used to go and gaze upon herself in it, and say, "Tell me, glass, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is the fairest? Tell me who." And the glass answered, "Thou, queen, art fairest in the land." But Snowdrop grew more and more beautiful, and when she was 7 years old, she was as bright as the day, and fairer than the queen herself. Then the glass one day answered the queen, when she went to council it as usual, "Thou, queen, mayst be fair and beauteous be, but Snowdrop is lovelier far than thee." When she heard this, she turned pale with rage and envy, and called to one of her servants and said, "Take Snowdrop away into the wide wood, that I may never see her more." Then the servant led her away, but his heart melted when she begged him to spare her life, and he said, "I will not hurt thee, thou pretty child." So he left her by herself, and though he thought it most likely that the wild beast would tear her in pieces, he felt as if a great weight were taken off his heart when he had made up his mind not to kill her, but leave her to her fate. Then poor Snowdrop wandered along through the wood in great fear, and the wild beast roared about her, but none did her any harm. In the evening she came to a little cottage, and went in there to rest herself, for her little feet would carry her no farther. Everything was spruce and neat in the cottage. On the table was spread a white cloth, and there were 7 little plates with 7 little loaves, and 7 little glasses with wine in them, and knives and forks laid in order, and the wall stood 7 little beds. Then, as she was very hungry, She picked a little piece of each loaf and drank a very little wine out of each glass, and after that she thought she would lie down and rest. So she tried all the little beds, and one was too big, and the other was too short, till at last the seventh suited her, and there she laid herself down and went to sleep. Presently in came the masters of the cottage, who were seven little dwarfs that lived among the mountains, and dug and searched for gold. They lighted up their seven lamps, and saw directly that all was not right. The first said, "Who has been sitting on my stool?" The second, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third, "Who has been picking my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been meddling with my spoon?" The fifth, "Who has been handling my fork?" The sixth, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh, "Who has been drinking my wine?" Then the first looked around and said, "Who has been lying on my bed?" And the rest came running to him, and everyone cried out that somebody had been upon his bed. But the seventh saw Snowdrop, and called all his burthen to come and see her. And they cried out with wonder and astonishment, and brought their lamps to look at her, and said, "Good heavens, what a lovely child she is!" And they were delighted to see her, and took care not to wake her. And the seventh dwarf slept an hour with each of the other dwarfs in turn, till the night was gone. In the morning, Snowdrop told them all her story, and they pitied her, and said if she would keep all things in order, and cook and wash and knit and spin for them, she might stay there where she was, and they would take good care of her. Then they went out all day long to their work, seeking for gold and silver in the mountains. And Snowdrop remained at home, and they warned her and said, "The queen will soon find out where you are, so take care and let no one in." But the queen, now that she thought Snowdrop was dead, believed that she was certainly the handsomest lady in the land, and she went to her glass and said, "Tell me, glass, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is fairest? Tell me who." And the glass answered, "Thou queen art the fairest in all this land, but over the hills is the greenwood shade, where the seven dwarfs their dwelling have made. There Snowdrop is hiding her head, and she is lovelier far, O queen, than thee." Then the queen was very much alarmed, for she knew that the glass always spoke the truth, and was sure that the servant had betrayed her. And she could not bear to think that anyone lived who was more beautiful than she, so she disguised herself as an old peddler, and went her way over the hills to the place where the dwarfs dwelt. When she knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell," Snowdrop looked out the window and said, "Good day, good woman, what have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," said she, "laces and bobbins of all colours." "I will let the old lady in. She seems to be a very good sort of body," thought Snowdrop. So she ran down and unbolted the door. "Bless me," said the old woman, "how badly your stays are laced. Let me lace them up with one of my nice new laces." Snowdrop did not dream of any mischief, so she stood up before the old woman. But she set to work so nimbly and pulled the lace so tight that Snowdrop lost her breath and fell down as if she was dead. "There's an end to all thy beauty," said the spiteful queen, and went away home. In the evening the seven dwarfs returned, and I need not say how grieved they were to see their faithful Snowdrop stretched upon the ground motionless, as if she was quite dead. However, they lifted her up And when they found what was the matter, they cut the lace, and in a little time she began to breathe. And as soon as she came to life again, then they said, "The old woman was the queen herself. Take care another time, and let no one in when we are away." When the queen got home, she went straight to her glass and spoke to it as usual. But to her great surprise, it still said, "Thou queen art the fairest in all this land, but over the hills, in the greenwood shade, where the seven dwarfs their dwelling have made, there Snowdrop is hiding her head, and she is lovelier far, a queen, than thee." Then the blood ran cold in her heart with spite and malice to see that Snowdrop still lived, and she dressed herself up again in a disguise, but very different from the one she wore before, and took with her a poisoned comb. When she reached the dwarf's cottage, she knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell?" But Snowdrop said, "I dare not let anyone in." Then the queen said, "Only look at my beautiful combs," and gave her the poisoned one. And it looked so pretty that she took it up and put it in her hair to try. But the moment it touched her head, the poison was so powerful that she fell down senseless. "There you may lie," said the queen, and went her way. But by good luck, the dwarfs returned very early that evening, and when they saw Snowdrop lying on the ground, they thought what had happened, and soon found the poisoned comb. And when they took it away, she recovered and told them all that had passed. And they warned her once more not to open the door to anyone. Meantime, the queen went home to her glass and trembled with rage when she received exactly the same answer as before. And she said, "Snowdrop shall die if it costs me my life." So she went secretly into a chamber and prepared a poisoned apple. The outside looked very rosy and tempting, but whoever tasted it was sure to die. Then she dressed herself up as a peasant's wife and travelled over the hills to the dwarf's cottage, knocked on the door, but Snowdrop put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anyone in, for the dwarfs have told me not." "Do as you please," said the old woman, "but at any rate take this pretty apple. I will make you a present of it." "No," said Snowdrop, "I dare not take it." "You silly girl," answered the other. "What are you afraid of? Do you think it's poisoned? Come, do you eat one part, and I will eat the other." Now the apple was so prepared that one side was good, though the other side was poisoned. When Snowdrop was very much tempted to taste, for the apple looked exceedingly nice, and when she saw the old woman eat, she could refrain no longer. But she had scarcely put the piece into her mouth when she fell down dead upon the ground. "This time nothing will save thee," said the queen, and she went home to her glass, and at last it said, "Thou, queen, art the fairest of all the fair." And then her envious heart was glad and as happy as such a heart could be. When evening came and the dwarfs returned home, they found Snowdrop lying on the ground. No breath passed her lips, and they were afraid that she was quite dead. They lifted her up and combed her hair and washed her face with wine and water. But all was in vain, for the little girl seemed quite dead. So they laid her upon a bier, and all seven watched and bewaited her 3 whole days. And then they proposed to bury her. But her cheeks were still rosy, and her face looked just as it had done when she were alive, so they said, "We will never bury her in the cold ground." And they made a coffin of glass, so that they might still look at her, and wrote her name upon it in golden letters, and that she was a king's daughter. And the coffin was placed upon the hill, and one of the dwarfs always sat by it and watched. And the birds of the air came too, and bemoaned Snowdrop, for first of all came an owl, and then a raven, but at last came a dove. And thus Snowdrop lay for a long, long time, and still only looked as though she were asleep, for she was even now as white as snow, and as red as blood, and as black as ebony. At last a prince came and called at the dwarf's house, and he saw Snowdrop, and read what was written in golden letters. Then he offered the dwarfs money, and earnestly prayed them to let him take her away. But they said, "We will not part with her for all the gold in the world." At last, however, they had pity on him, and gave him the coffin. But the moment he lifted it up to carry it home with him, the piece of apple fell from between her lips, and Snowdrop awoke and said, "Where am I?" And the prince answered, "Thou art safe with me." Then he told her all that had happened, and said, "I love you better than all the world. Come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my wife." And Snowdrop consented, and went home with the prince, and everything was prepared with great pomp and splendour for their wedding. To the feast was invited, among the rest, Snowdrop's old enemy the queen, and as she was dressing herself in fine rich clothes, she looked in the glass and said, "Tell me, glass, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is the fairest? Tell me who." And the glass answered, "Thou, lady, art fairest here, I ween, but lovelier far is the new-made queen." When she heard this, she started with rage, but her envy and curiosity were so great that she could not help setting out to see the bride. And when she arrived, she saw that it was no other than Snowdrop, who, as she thought, had been dead a long while. She choked with passion and fell ill and died. But Snowdrop and the prince lived and reigned happily over that land many, many years. The end. That was a nice little one to end the evening. Thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.